This message comes from Noom, using psychology and biology to build personal meal plans to fit your lifestyle, taking into account dietary restrictions, medical issues, and other personal needs. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. All right, everybody. This week, you and I are connecting the dots between public education, Ronald Reagan, and the WWE. I know. How are all of these things connected? Well, we are going to find out with NPR's education correspondent, Corey Turner, and best-selling author, Josephine Reisman. Corey, Josie, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Perfect.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.
Yes.
Okay, so which one of these battles do you think you are more likely to win? A congressional confirmation hearing or a WWE wrestling showdown? I myself personally, the showdown, I think I would win. I think I have big face energy. To use some wrestling terminology, I think I have big face energy.
I don't know you that well, but you have great baby face energy. The crowd is behind you.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do either. I'm just gonna bow out of both.
All right, I'll accept the cop out. I'll accept the cop out at all.
Thank you.
Luckily, this isn't a battle at all. It's just a good old conversation about what could happen to our nation's education system if former WWE CEO and co-founder Linda McMahon is confirmed as the Secretary of Education. And to start, I want you to remember this, that for every time President Trump does something unprecedented, he's also doing something that's been done over and over and over again in American politics. Because just like fashion, our politics are always getting recycled. And right now, what's getting rehashed is a nearly half-centuries-old debate over the U.S. Department of Education. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Department of Education was established under President Jimmy Carter in 1979. And the very next year, in 1980, when Ronald Reagan was running for president, he pledged to dismantle it, calling the department President Carter's new bureaucratic boondoggle. Got to bring that word back, boondoggle. Just listen to Reagan's State of the Union address in 1982.
The budget plan I submit to you on February 8th will realize major savings by dismantling the Departments of Energy and Education.
Sounds a lot like President Trump when he pledged to close the department in office and on the campaign trail.
And I'm going to close the Department of Education and move education back to the states. And we're going to do it fast.
Republicans have been dogging the Department of Education for decades, but none of them have ever actually dismantled it. Because when it comes down to it, they do seem to like it. So today, I want us to look at this love-hate relationship Republicans have for the department and how this debate looks a lot like a WWE wrestling match. How it's real and how it isn't. So, Corey, help me out here. What do Republicans hate about the Department of Education?
The easiest answer to that question is they hate the way Democrats in particular have used the department as kind of a cudgel to pursue liberal or progressive items on their agenda. I think the best, most recent example is Republicans were really angry with President Biden when he tried to expand protections under federal civil rights law known as Title IX. He tried to expand protections for transgender students. And Republicans saw that as a blatant overreach.
Now, on the flip side, what do Republicans love about the Department of Education?
I think the most important thing to talk about here is the Department of Education manages two enormous and enormously important pots of money that go to our public schools. One helps pay for special education through a federal law known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Mm-hmm. The same is true of another funding pot called Title I. So this money goes specifically to schools all over the country, not just big city schools, but lots of one street light rural towns where, because we fund our schools primarily through state and local property taxes, these schools are just at a financial disadvantage. They just are.
Right, just from population density.
And so Title I is the federal government's response to that imbalance. And there's no difference between a school in a high-poverty urban district and a high-poverty rural Alabama district, which is actually where I am right now, Brittany. They both get Title I money. And so what do Republicans love or at least appreciate, value about the department? It is that money.
Well, to stay on this topic of love, hate, tension, that specific tension was on full display at the confirmation hearing for President Trump's pick for Education Secretary, Linda McMahon. Josie, you've written a whole book about Linda's husband, Vince McMahon, and his reign over his company, World Wrestling Entertainment, a.k.a. the WWE.
Yes.
Vince McMahon has been in the limelight for decades, much more so than Linda, though she has been a part of storylines on the WWE.
No, she's kept a lower profile.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
I want to know, what do we need to know about Linda McMahon? And since she's slated to be the next Secretary of Education, can you tell us, who is she? What's her worldview?
Well, it's funny. Linda McMahon doesn't really want you to know anything about Linda McMahon. That has been true for a long time. From what I could glean in my research, this is not a woman who opens up to virtually anyone. When she speaks, as you could see at the confirmation hearings, she uses sort of these kindly buzzwords that dance around what she's actually saying. And from the best I can tell, based on her actions, what really seems to motivate this woman who grew up as a upper middle class girl in New Bern, North Carolina, is the dream of just security, wealth, and power. It's kind of boring, unlike, say, Pete Hegseth or any number of other bombastic personalities who Trump has nominated for key cabinet positions. Linda has long been a master of this mask of, I'm a kindly grandmother who wants to be nice to you. I'll be a mother figure. I'm a good administrator. I run businesses well. When in reality, the fact is she's the hatchet woman and will do what Trump, who she's known since 1981, tells her to do.
Corey, is there anything significant that you reflect on that you learned about Linda McMahon during this hearing?
There's one moment that comes to mind, which is actually the first question she got in the hearing from a Republican. It was the Republican chairman of the committee, Bill Cassidy from Louisiana.
Thank you very much. I shall begin.
Because Cassidy's own daughter has dyslexia, he asked her,
but in other states, what would be your approach to make sure that the child who's dyslexic is diagnosed at an early stage and receives the intervention that she or he would?
This is a question about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is the law that protects students with disabilities and guarantees them. There is no federal right, Brittany, for all children in the U.S. to get an education.
Hold on.
Education is not in the Constitution. The only federal right to an education is afforded to kids with disabilities through the IDEA.
Wow.
That is so interesting. I did not know that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
It was not that long ago. IDEA is 50 years old this year when children with disabilities were turned away from public schools. Period. End of story.
Gosh.
Circling back to your question about Linda McMahon, she was asked a question about helping children with dyslexia. She did not reference IDEA. She did not reference any of the protections afforded to children through IDEA. She simply said,
would need to receive.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Cassidy. And I know this is a very... I'm sorry, it's your daughter. But I certainly very much would like to be sure that we are looking to diagnose issues like dyslexia early, because we have found that it can be turned around. So I'd like to work with you and understand how we could have better approach.
It was actually a fairly generic response.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds like a non-answer. Okay. Now I want to take us back to something you brought up a minute ago, Josie. The fact that Donald Trump and Linda and Vince McMahon have known each other for a very long time, since the 1980s.
Yeah.
Basically since the time that the Department of Education was born. I mean,
according to Linda, the Trumps and the McMahons first met at a Rolling Stones concert in New Jersey in 1981.
Wow.
Sorry, that is a mental picture.
It's possibly the most boomer thing you can imagine.
Obviously, that meeting has led to a lengthy relationship. I mean, Trump appeared in a WWE wrestling match. And
you're underplaying it.
He's had storylines.
He had a big storyline in 2007.
Hey, look at this! Donald Trump taking down Mr. Oh, my God! The hostile takeover of Donald Trump.
But even in the 80s, he was hosting, quote-unquote, WrestleManias.
Josie, for you having researched the McMahons and Trump's long history together, what's an example of how Trump and the McMahons share a similar worldview? I mean, I don't know. I've heard you say before that Trump answers Vince McMahon's phone calls differently. Coming up, how Trump answers one McMahon's phone calls differently than almost anyone else.
There are two people he gets everyone out of the room so he can have a confidential conversation with.
Who these people are and what that says about the future of our education system. After a quick break.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Saatva, maker of quality, handcrafted mattresses. Founder and CEO Ron Rutson shares one of their core values.
At Saatva, we believe sleep does unlock a superpower. When you wake up and you're totally refreshed, you go after things more. And it all starts with being on the right mattress. And that's what Saatva has been inspired by from the day that we started.
To learn more, go to SAATVA.com/NPR. This message comes from Capital One. The Capital One Venture X business card has no preset spending limit, so the card's purchasing power can adapt to meet business needs. Plus, the card earns unlimited double miles on every purchase. So the more a business spends, the more miles earned. And when traveling, the Venture X business card grants access to over 1,000 airport lounges. The Venture X business card. What's in your wallet? Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/VentureXBusiness.
This message comes from Grainger. As a maintenance specialist for a historic high-rise, you know that vintage charm historically needs constant attention, which is why when it's time to upgrade turn-of-the-century mechanicals, they turn to Grainger. With easy access to 1 million-plus products and the scale to deliver when and where you need them, the right tools and supplies are never far away, so you can keep that vintage building running like new. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Josie, for you having researched the McMahons and Trump's long history together, what's an example of how Trump and the McMahons share a similar worldview? I mean, I don't know. I've heard you say before that Trump answers Vince McMahon's phone calls differently.
Well, at least used to. But at least as of the first Trump term, there were two people in the world that Trump would take personal phone calls from and kick everybody else out of the room so he could talk to them in private.
Oh, wow.
Usually Trump likes putting people on speaker. It doesn't matter if it's like the Chancellor of Germany or a pro golfer he knew. He likes to showboat. But there are two people he gets everyone out of the room so he can have a confidential conversation with. One is Mark Burnett, the producer of The Apprentice, and the other is Vince McMahon.
Gosh, thinking about the length of this relationship, starting in the 80s and extending all the way to today. Fast forwarding to the presidential election 2024, last year, Josie, there was this moment when we saw the intersection between education policy and the WWE and Trump and the WWE wrestler, The Undertaker, all converge in a surprising way. Just mere days before the election.
Yeah.
I don't want to assume, but I don't know if everybody who's listening to this show is an Undertaker listener as well.
Right. So Mark Calloway, the man who used to wrestle as the famous wrestler The Undertaker, he has a podcast, and he is a Republican. And he had Trump on a few days before the election. If you watch it, you see Trump immediately turn the interview around and just ask Undertaker excited, childlike questions about what pro wrestling is like.
How often did it, I mean, I know you're supposed to interview me, but I find it very interesting. How often did it happen where somebody gets really angry? In other words, you hit a guy accidentally the wrong way or something, and he's had it.
Because that's how much Donald Trump is obsessed with pro wrestling and has been since he was about 9 years old. So that's interesting. But what you're talking about is at the end, the Undertaker, Mark Calloway, he brings out his teenage daughter.
Title IX. I want to put a face to it. If you can I bring my daughter?
Absolutely.
Okay, come here.
Wow, such a beautiful... That's what I call a beautiful daughter, huh?
Thank you. She is, and she's quite the quarterback.
They just say you need to protect Title IX. And Trump says, I'll do everything I can.
I will get rid of it fast. Men playing in women's sports is insane.
And what they're really talking about is just trying to exclude trans people from sports and public life.
Which also goes back to one of the most effective ads Trump ran through the whole election cycle was when he said Kamala Harris is for they, them.
They, them, not you.
Not you.
And to be clear, all of this frustration over Title IX is because the Biden administration expanded Title IX to include protections for transgender students. And as we all know, Republicans were extremely energized by this. Anti-trans rhetoric became a rallying cry for the Trump campaign. But Corey, all this anger and frustration Republicans have at Title IX over transgender rights is kind of moot at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually before Trump's inauguration that a judge struck down Biden's expansive protections for transgender students through Title IX. So they weren't actually in place or being enforced when Trump came into office. But Brittany, just to bring us fully to the present, you know, it's not just protections for trans students that we see really driving this fight over the role of the Ed Department, what it is, what it should be, what it could be, what it can't be. I mean, we saw just about a week and a half ago, the department under the Trump administration issued a Dear Colleague letter to all K-12 schools and colleges that take federal dollars.
That's a lot of schools.
And this Dear Colleague letter basically took the Trump administration's position on diversity, equity, inclusion and sent it to every school in the country and said, you need to get rid of anything that has the slightest ring of DEI. Because if you don't, we will cut your federal funding.
Right. And this is Linda. Linda's not even in power yet. This isn't even Linda yet.
This came up in a really fascinating exchange in her Senate confirmation hearing.
It sure did. Yeah, you tell that story.
Senator Chris Murphy, her home state senator, Connecticut, asked her, my son is in high school.
My son is in a public school. He takes a class called African American History. If you're running an African American history class, could you perhaps be in violation of this court order, of this executive order?
Under these new Trump administration executive orders, under this new Dear Colleague letter, is that against the rules? Could his school be at risk now of losing federal funding?
I'm not quite certain, and I'd like to look into it further and get back to you on that.
And she didn't answer the question.
There's a possibility, you're saying, that public schools that run African American history classes, right? This is a class that has been taught in public schools for decades, could lose federal funding if they continue to teach African American history.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I would like to take a look at these programs and fully understand the breadth of the executive order and get back to you on that.
Which is a classic Linda dodge. Huh. I mean, I've been following Linda stuff for a while, and that's how she operates. She smiles and says, well, I don't really have an answer to that question, but I look forward to working with you.
The non-answer. The non-answer.
Yes.
Okay, so to bring this all full circle, we've been dancing around this idea that Trump has long been closely connected to the owners of the WWE, that he loves wrestling, and in some ways, he and his allies have adopted the WWE's playbook. To close this conversation, what does the connection between all these dots say about what is real and what is fake in the debate over the future of the Department of Education?
One of the things that came out of the confirmation hearing that did remind me a bit of WWE, frankly, is like there is this narrative, this overriding narrative that the department is bad, right? Mm-hmm. It is, what was the phrase Reagan used, a bureaucratic boondoggle?
Boondoggle, that's the one.
Right? So that is the narrative. That is the narrative that President Trump is selling. And I assume that is going to be the narrative that Linda McMahon tries to sell. But there's a bit of a shell game happening here, because the fact is a lot of people, Democrats and Republicans both, agree that many of the things the Ed Department does are important. And nobody wants to see them stop. And so what we're getting instead is this sort of like, let's kill Ed, because it's not really. It's abolishing the building. There's the broader narrative, which is driven largely by politics. And as you pointed out, they're very old politics, hating on the Ed Department. I just think it's much more useful to ask, okay, what are you really going to try to do here? What is actually feasible here? And it is so much more nuanced and interesting than we're closing the department.
Gosh. Well, oh my gosh. Corey, Josie, I have learned so much here. I have really appreciated talking to you both. Thank you both so much.
Oh, this has been great. I thank both of you, as I've learned a lot today, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That was NPR's education correspondent, Corey Turner, and New York Times bestselling author, Josephine Reisman. Her book about Vince McMahon and the WWE is called Ringmaster, Vince McMahon and the Unmaking of America. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Barton Girdwood,
Corey Bridges.
This episode was edited by
Nina Pathak.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Warby Parker. If you wear glasses, you know how hard it is to find the perfect pair. But step into a Warby Parker store and you'll see it doesn't have to be. Find a Warby Parker store near you at warbyparker.com/retail. Support for this podcast and the following message come from Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. Indeed's Sponsored Jobs helps you stand out. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed and get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/NPR. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. This message comes from Warby Parker. If you wear glasses, you know how hard it is to find the perfect pair. But step into a Warby Parker store and you'll see it doesn't have to be. Find a Warby Parker store near you at warbyparker.com/retail.